2016. Okay, so we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so we are continuing with our discussion of Sutta number 43 in the Majjhima Nikaya. This is called the Maha Vedala Sutta, which is translated the greater series of questions and answers. And as I mentioned during the previous classes on the sutta, this is a very technical sutta. And so for that reason, at the beginning I was very hesitant to introduce this sutta into the class because it deals with rather complex and quite technical points of doctrine. But I don't see Suki Park here. She was the one who insisted, why don't you do Sutta 43? Why don't you do Sutta 43? Okay, so I agreed to do it. And so if some of the topics that we're going to be discussing seem far beyond your own range of experience and capacity, you can assure yourself you're not alone. Even the person who's teaching the sutta, for him, it's far beyond his range and capacity, but he just knows what the text says. Okay, so I think we didn't get into the section on the first jhana last time. Is that correct? Okay, so now we're on the very bottom of page 390. This section is called the first jhana. Okay, and so this is the monk Venerable Mahakotita questioning the Venerable Sariputta. So he says, what is the first jhana? And then Sariputta explains, this is the standard sutta formula for the first jhana. Secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome, there she is, unwholesome mental states. A bhikkhu enters and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. This is called the first jhana. Okay, so here we have the standard formula, which you encounter dozens of times, at least a dozen times in the Majjhima Nikaya and in other Nikayas. But now Mahakotita raises a question which shows what I call this drift or bent towards an analytical approach to the teaching, where it's sort of moving in the direction of the Abhidhamma methodology. So he says, friend, how many factors does the first jhana have? And so Sariputta says, when a monk has entered the first jhana, there occur applied thought, sustained thought, rapture, pleasure, and unification of mind. That is how the first jhana has 5 factors. Well, these are called, in Pali, the word used is anga. Anga. And so in the Abhidhamma, we get one category of phenomena which is analyzed is called the jnanga, the factors of jhana. So the Abhidhamma will take each of the jhanas individually and then analyze what are the factors, the anga of that jhana. But here we're concerned only with the first jhana, where it is said that when a monk is entered on the first jhana, there occurs applied thought. This is vitakka. So we have these 5 factors. What's called applied thought is vitakka, which technically it's explained as the application of the mind to the object. And so that is sort of taking the mind, as you will, almost in your hand, and putting the mind on the object. And then vichara, which usually goes along with vitakka, is here translated sustained thought. But more recently I've been translating it as examination. But it's not an intellectual examination of the object, but it's just, I would call it continuing to observe the object. So for example, if you're doing mindfulness of breathing, it's vitakka, which is applying the mind to the breath. And vichara, sustained thought, examination, which is observing the breath. Okay, then there's rapture. This is piti, joy, elation, exhilaration. Then pleasure, which is the feeling tone in the jhana. Feeling not in the sense of emotion, but simply the feeling of pleasant feeling, a feeling of ease of mind. And if we look at the standard canonical description of the first jhana, we find those 4 factors are mentioned. We see it's accompanied by applied thought and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. So up to this point, the 4 jhana factors are simply pulling material out from the standard formula. But now, the list of jhana factors introduces something which is not in the standard formula, and that is what's it's written here in Pali, cittase kagata. This is what is translated as unification of mind. And I guess the compilers, well, even going back before the Abhidhamma, the compilers of the sutta would have felt or realized that in order for a state to qualify as a jhana, the mind has to be unified or continuously focused or absorbed in the object. And so there has to be a mental factor to account for that absorption in the object. And that mental factor, they decided, is to be called ekaggata. Ekaggata comes from, it's actually a compound, which comes from eka is one, then agga is a point or a tip, and then the ta just turns it into a noun. The ta is somewhat like ness in English, one-pointedness. Okay, so those are the 5 factors of the first jhana. And then as this mode of analysis began to progress further, we consult the Abhidhamma, then we see factors mentioned for the second jhana, third jhana, and fourth jhana. So we have in the second jhana, which of these jhana factors are missing? No. Right, very good. So when you progress from the first jhana to the second jhana, then vitakka, vichara fall away. Progressing from the second jhana to the third jhana, which factors drop away? Wait, let me just say first, okay, so the factors in the second jhana are piti, sukha, chitta, ekagata. When one goes from the second jhana to the third jhana, what change takes place in the jhana factors? Right, piti falls away. And so the third jhana has sukha and ekagata. Then in progressing from the third jhana to the fourth jhana, what change takes place in the jhana factors? Okay, sukha falls away, but sukha is a feeling we call vedana. And every jhana, or every state of consciousness, has to have a feeling. So when sukha falls away, when pleasure falls away, it doesn't mean that there's no feeling at all in the fourth jhana, but pleasure gets replaced by something else, which is called, you don't have to use the Pali, you could use English. There's a more precise word for this feeling than equanimity. Somebody said tranquility? No. I mean, there's tranquility there, but there's a very precise term for this. I have to speak a little. Right, right. It's the feeling that's neither painful nor pleasant. Technically, or in Pali, it's called adukkamasukha vedana. You want to practice? Adukkamasukha vedana. Very easy to say. Okay. Okay, and then the next question is, how many factors are abandoned in the first jhana, and how many factors are possessed? The second part of the question seems almost identical with the previous question. Okay, so what are abandoned in the first jhana are precisely the 5 hindrances. So sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, or dullness and drowsiness, restlessness and remorse and doubt. So those are the 5 hindrances, and even to progress towards the first jhana, this is in the commentarial scheme, the scheme of the Visuddhimagga. Before one goes into the first jhana, one enters a stage of samadhi which is called neighborhood concentration, access concentration, threshold concentration. So in the threshold concentration, already the 5 hindrances are eliminated. But the elimination of the 5 hindrances in the threshold samadhi is not very secure because they still have a tendency to rise up again. But in the first jhana, then the 5 hindrances are very securely pushed away or suppressed. And so that's why it says that the 5 hindrances, the sutta uses the word abandoned, but we have to remember, this is an important point, the word abandoned has different levels of meaning in the suttas. So one kind of abandoning is what takes place in the jhana, which means abandoning by suppression, by pushing away, not in the sense of Freudian repression. If there are any psychologists here, it's not in that sense. But it's just that by the strength of the concentration of mind, the samadhi, the hindrances don't have the opportunity to arise. They're put into a state of suspended animation. But there's another kind of abandoning which is accomplished by the world-transcending path. That is called abandoning by eradication. With the world-transcending path, then the hindrances and the other defilements are eradicated. They're said to be uchina mula, which means cut off at the root, so that they can never arise again. In the case of the jhanas, somebody might be very skilled in the jhanas, and so they can suppress the hindrances. But if they become a little bit negligent and careless in their conduct and their mental activities, it could create an opportunity for the hindrances to rise again. Or under provocative external conditions, the hindrances can arise. But through the path, the world-transcending path, when the hindrances are eradicated, they can never arise again. Okay, maybe at this point, any questions? Okay, then we'll go on to the next section. And I mentioned earlier several times, because the sutta takes the form of a series of question and answers, there's sometimes like jumps in topic, and so it's not always so clear to see the connection between one section and the next that follows. Sometimes perhaps there is no clear connection at all. It's just a kind of miscellaneous exploration of various topics. Okay, so now we have a new topic introduced. So now Mahakotita says that these 5 faculties each have a separate field, a separate domain, and do not experience each other's field and domain. That is the eye faculty, ear faculty, nose faculty, tongue faculty, and the body faculty. So each has its own domain. For example, the eye faculty, what is its domain? I have to speak loudly. Okay, sights, or in more technical language, we would say rupa, it's visible forms. The ear faculty has its domain, sounds. The nose faculty, odors. Taste faculty, flavors. Body faculty has textures, tactile objects. Okay, so now of these 5 faculties, each with its separate field and so on, what is their resort? What experiences their fields and domains? And then to get to the answer, we have to jump down a little bit. Now, these 5 faculties, each having a separate field, they have mind as their resort. Mind experiences their fields and domains. So the mind, according to Buddhism, is the 6th faculty, and the mind can experience the fields of all of the other 5 sense faculties. Again, to use an example I've used before, when I say, look out and see Chris is wearing a yellow shirt, so I identify the shirt as the color yellow. So it's the eye faculty picks up the yellow color, but the mind faculty identifies it as yellow. If I taste from this cup, okay, the tongue faculty picks up the taste, but in this case, the mind faculty knows the taste and it knows that I've tasted that before, but the mind faculty is a little bewildered. It doesn't know what it is. Oh, this is the juju, some kind of berry? What is the name of that berry? It's a goji berry, right. Okay. So now the mind faculty has suddenly gotten a little brighter. Okay, so the mind faculty can know the objects of all the other senses, whereas the eye cannot hear sounds, the nose cannot experience, or cannot smell the texture of this cloth. Of course, if I go like this, the nose can do it, but that's, of course, technically that's the body faculty extending over the nose that experiences that texture. Okay, now we can see the movement of the sutta. Now we're moving from the 5 sense faculties. The question comes up, what do these 5 faculties stand in dependence on? What, in other words, what do they depend on? What sustains them? And then the answer comes that these 5 faculties stand in dependence on something called vitality, or in Pali the word is vayu. Excuse me? Oh. Did I say vayu? Oh, no. If I said vayu, that was a mistake. Ayu. Yeah, vayu is wind, the wind element. But ayu is vitality, or more technically, it's the life faculty. So it's said that what keeps us alive, what makes us alive, is the presence of ayu, vitality, which in the Abhidhamma system will be identified with something called Jivitindriya. Jivitindriya is the life faculty. I don't know how this would square with modern biology. Do we have any biologists in the room? I think it's safe that we don't have any. Okay, so in the ancient Indian way of conceiving, what makes a living being alive is the activity, the presence and the activity of Jivitindriya, the life faculty. And so death takes place when the life faculty is cut off. So if somebody kills another creature, what brings about the death of that creature, it said, is the cutting off or the destruction of the life faculty. Okay, so according to this answer, the five faculties, the five sense faculties, functioning as such depend on vitality. That is, it's only as long as one is alive that the five senses can function. You know, if a dead person, we still have the form of the eye, the ear, the nose, the tongue, but because in the dead person, the life faculty is gone, the eye doesn't see any forms, the ear doesn't hear any sounds. Except perhaps in that 1960s film, is it The Night of the Living Dead? Okay, so now the question comes, what does vitality depend upon? And then the answer is that vitality or life, animation, the life faculty, depends on heat or warmth. This is the warmth of the body. And then the question comes up, what does heat depend on? And heat, it said, depends on vitality. Okay, so we have these two things depending upon one another. Heat depends on vitality or the life faculty. The life faculty depends on heat, on a certain balance of heat. If it gets too cold, then one gets what is that called? Hypothermia. And too cold, and the life faculty can no longer function, death takes place. If there's too much heat, again, the life faculty, maybe the heat of the body gets overwhelmed, and then the life faculty perishes. Okay, so now Mahakotita is a bit puzzled, so he says, we understand, the Sariputta has said, that vitality depends on heat, and heat depends on vitality. So he says, how should we understand this? And Sariputta says that he'll explain with a simile. So he says it's just as when an oil lamp is burning, so its radiance its light is seen in dependence on the flame, and the flame is seen in dependence on its light or radiance. Okay, so the flame creates the light, and so the light depends on the flame. There's something that doesn't quite work here. The light depends on the flame. The flame doesn't actually depend on the light. So the trick is by saying is seen in dependence on. So the light is seen in dependence on the flame, and the flame is seen in dependence on the light. Even if the simile is imperfect, but it's just used to illustrate the point that these two things, life or vitality and bodily heat, depend on each other. And we have to remember also this is coming out from ancient Indian culture, and so it's drawing upon the ancient Indian physiology or science of the body. Okay, now we're going to be moving into from this introducing vitality. Now we're moving into a discussion of a particular meditative attainment called the cessation of feeling and perception. It's not like a coma, no. It sounds like it, but it's not. And there was a discussion of this attainment of cessation in the shorter series of questions and answers, Sutta number 44. And so to get a fuller picture of the attainment of cessation, one has to take those two suttas together. Okay, so now Mahakotita asks, okay, vital formations, are vital formations things that can be felt, or are they things that cannot be felt? But maybe let's put this another way. Are vital formations feelings, or are they not feelings? And then Sariputta says, vital formations are not things that can be felt. In other words, they're not feelings. Because if vital formations were things that can be felt, then a monk who has entered the cessation of perception and feeling would not be seen to emerge from it. That is, when the monk has entered the cessation of perception and feelings, then feelings have ceased. And so if vital formations or vitality were things that could be felt, if they were a feeling, then when one enters the cessation of feeling, then one would be dead. There's no feeling, and so there's no vital formations, and so it would be like a voluntary death. And if you're dead, if you enter a meditative state and you die in that state, then you don't emerge from it. You're gone. Like there are some, it's supposed to be like an ability that some very advanced meditators can acquire, and that they sit down and they go into the meditative attainment, and then they extinguish their vital formations within that attainment. And then when that happens, then they're dead and gone. You know, they might still be sitting in the lotus posture, but they never come out from it. Okay, but it's because the vital formations are not things that can be felt. They're not feelings. And so one who enters the cessation of perception and feeling can be seen to emerge from it, because he's still alive within that attainment. Okay, now comes the question, when this body is bereft or deprived of how many things, is it then discarded and forsaken, left lying senseless like a log? In other words, when how many things have gone, is the body really completely dead? Then Sariputta answers, when the body is deprived of three things, it is then discarded and forsaken like senseless like a log. So what are those three things? Vitality, heat, bodily heat, and consciousness. Okay, now comes the question, what is the difference between one who is dead, who has completed his time, and a monk who has entered the cessation of perception and feeling? I think in American English, completed his time means when a prisoner has finished his prison sentence. Is that correct? But in Pali, it's kala kirya, which means having done time. Having done one's time, that means you're dead. Okay, so what is the difference between one who is dead and a monk who has entered the cessation of perception and feeling? And this is sort of asking, in that present condition, when you look at them, what is the difference between them? Okay, in the case of one who is dead, his bodily formations have ceased, his verbal formations have ceased, his mental formations have ceased, his vitality is exhausted, his heat has been dissipated, and his faculties, the sense faculties, are fully broken up. Okay, this sentence needs a little unpacking. Okay, so what is meant by the bodily formations? Bodily formations, verbal formations, mental formations here. To get the answer to this question, one has to go to the next sutta, sutta number 44. And this is on page 399. In paragraph 14, a layman is asking a bhikkhuni these questions. So he says, what is the bodily formation? What is the verbal formation? What is the mental formation? Okay, in and out breathing are the bodily formation. Applied thought and sustained thought are the verbal formation, and perception and feeling are the mental formation. And then the question is raised, why are these things called bodily formation, and so on? And the answer that's given is, in-breathing and out-breathing are bodily, things that are bound up with the body, and so they are called, so in-breathing and out-breathing are called the bodily formation. Or maybe bodily activity would work better. Okay, then comes the verbal activities. Okay, so first one applies thought and sustains thought, or one thinks and examines. And then subsequently, one breaks out into speech. Yeah, so if I'm going to say something, even if I'm speaking rapidly, but in a very, very quick way, thoughts are going through my mind, sort of determining what I'm going to say. Okay, so thought, applied and sustained thought, those are called the verbal activities. Okay, and then perception and feeling are mental states that are bound up with the mind, so that is why perception and feeling are called mental activities, or the mental formation. Okay, so in the case of one who is dead, is he breathing in and out? No. Is he thinking and examining things? No. Does he have perception and feeling? How do you know? Okay, of course his vitality is gone, that's why he's dead. His heat, the body becomes cold when it's dead. And the faculties are fully broken up. There's no functioning of sight, hearing, and so on. Okay, in the case of one who has entered the cessation of perception and feeling, okay, the bodily activities have ceased. There's no in and out breathing. the verbal activities have ceased. There's no thinking and examining. And then the surprising thing is his mental activities have ceased. So there's not even feeling and perception going on. That's why it's called cessation of feeling and perception. Okay, but his vitality is not exhausted, still alive. His heat has not been dissipated, the body is still warm, and his faculties have become exceptionally clear. This is a little bit of a puzzle because within that attainment, there's no seeing, hearing, smelling, and so on, because all mental activity has ceased. So I don't quite know how to understand this. Perhaps what it might mean is that when one emerges from this cessation of perception and feeling, then the faculties become exceptionally, they're functioning with extreme lucidity, with extreme accuracy, or maybe they're very bright, very peaceful. Does anybody have any other ideas about what could be meant by this? You don't have to worry, because I'm not sure myself. Okay, so we'll just leave it at that. And sometimes the question that's brought up just... Did you have something to say? Oh, only if it's an answer to my question. No, I don't have an answer. Because then wait till I ask for questions. Yeah, the question sometimes comes up, if breathing is actually stopped, in and out breathing, how can a person live if they're not breathing? It seems breath is essential to life. And, I don't have the definite answer to that question. One possibility is that the skin is still breathing, and so the skin is taking in whatever oxygen is needed and discharging or emitting carbon dioxide and waste. Another answer might be that even though it's said that the in and out breathing has stopped, but actually it's still occurring, but very, very subtle level. I think even Venerable Dhammajiva said that during the meditation retreat last month, if I remember correctly. Okay, so that is the difference between one who is dead and the monk who has entered the cessation of perception and feeling. Okay, now I could take your question. And use the microphone. Okay, take the microphone.
Here we are again. So when you're dead, everything stops.
Yeah.
But what happens to that? When we talk about karma and we talk about that, what are we going to use? What word can we use? That spirit, that
for what goes on to the next life?
I'm sorry?
For what continues on to the next
yes.
existence?
What?
Again,
that's not mentioned here. That.
Yeah, it's not bringing up that particular question, and in fact, I don't even know. Well, actually, there are some expressions in the sutta which indicate that. It's sometimes called Vijnana Sota, which is sota is stream, Vijnana is consciousness, the stream of consciousness, and then Sutta number 106 uses the expression Sangvatanika Vijnana. Sangvatanika, it's the rolling on or progressing or even evolving consciousness. So it seems like they're trying to find a way to express the continuity of personal existence without bringing in the Atman or the self or the soul. And so it's using this expression, sangvatanika, sangvatana, it's rolling on, and vijnana, consciousness. So it's a consciousness which is always changing. It doesn't retain its identity. So the Buddha says it's not the same consciousness, and yet the consciousness continues on through as a process, an ever-changing, ever-changing but continuous process from one existence to the next.
Thank you.
Bhante, it's always been my understanding that when the breath ceases, that's also the fourth jhana. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's said that in the fourth jhana, the in and out breathing have stopped. Yeah.
So is that what we're talking about?
No, this isn't the fourth jhana. This is a state beyond the fourth jhana.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't go into details about this attainment of cessation of perception and feeling. Okay, with the attainment of the first jhana, vitaka and vichara, thought and applied and sustained thought, cease. Okay, with the attainment of the fourth jhana, the in and out breathing cease. But even in the fourth jhana and in the higher states of samadhi beyond the fourth jhana, the formless meditations, there's still perception and feeling. So, from the fourth jhana on, the bodily activity has ceased and the verbal activity has ceased, but the mental activity is still continuing. But with the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling, then even the mental activity ceases.
Thank you, Bhante.
Ceases.
Bhante, attainment of fourth jhana, is it that it completely ceases, or like you said that there can be very, very shallow breathing which is almost not detectable? You know,
Yeah, this is what I
yeah,
said.
I find it difficult to believe that if you can stop breathing and then live forever.
Yeah, the text always use the expression that the in and out breathing cease.
I know, visibly you may not see it, but maybe at a very, very...
Yeah, this is something I don't know. But if we take the standpoint that some degree of breathing is necessary to sustain life,
Right, exactly.
then it can be that just in a very, very subtle way, the body through the lungs is taking in air and expelling air.
Thank you.
But it might be just so subtle that it just seems like no breath is taking place at all. Okay, I want to move on now to, oh yes, please take bring the microphone to the back, or come up.
So this is after practicing meditation from my teacher, Dr. Kumar. And he has practiced samadhi or jhanas for jhana up till fourth level. And then he demonstrated in Korea. In fourth jhana, the heart actually stops.
Mm.
And it was demonstrated by all the equipment. It was not just like a human saying that the heart stopped. So in fourth jhana, heart actually stops.
Mm.
But that's a good question. I don't know how a person still lives. And he actually stopped heart for 1 hour.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the experience I had in meditation, the difference that I think between cessation of feeling and perception of the person who is alive and the person who is dead is that they are the happiest being, because they examine the situation in its complete trueness.
Yeah.
They don't react to it. So they are the happiest person because they can actually see the things at 360-degree angle, not just in the way one can look at it. So that's I think that's the difference between a person who is dead Like
Well, of
he-
course, a
he
person
won't
who's
be
dead has
happy.
no happiness
Yeah,
at all.
like he
No.
doesn't have any like vitality, but the person who is alive and who can experience that state beyond fourth jhana,
Yeah.
which is the supramundane state of mind, is the person who develops that complete happiness by removing the impurities in
Yeah,
the body.
yeah. But I should say further that first, to become an arahat, which would be like a fully liberated being, it's not necessary to be able to achieve the cessation of perception and feeling. This is said to be attainable only, and then to attain the cessation of perception and feeling, it's not necessary to be an arahat. It's said to be, this state is said to be accessible to non-returners and arahats. But it's accessible only to non-returners and arhats who are able to achieve the 8 previous meditative attainments.